Chapter 34. What is the farthest you have ever traveled? It may have been 1995 or 96 when I went to Japan. The reason I went was to learn about making rubber parts for automobiles. It all came about because of a new job. I left Bone in '93 and worked for Greenwood Plastics here in Danville for about a year and a half. In early December, I got a call from Vicky at the Vermilion County Development Office. She said that representatives from a Japanese company were in her office and wanted to talk to me. I went down there and she introduced me to these two Japanese men, and I interviewed with them that afternoon. Vicky told me they were going to announce the opening of a new plant in Danville the next day. I was the only person they interviewed for the position of operations manager. They asked me if I could start immediately, and I said yes. So I was the first person they talked to and the first one hired to start the new plant. The plant was in a brand new building across the street from TPAC. They were going to transfer the production of several rubber parts that were being made in their Japanese plants for customers here in the States. They told me that I would have to travel to Japan and spend 3 weeks there touring their facilities and seeing how the parts were made. In about 3 or 4 days, I was on my way to Japan, along with one of the Japanese who was my new boss. We traveled by car up to O'Hare and by plane to Detroit to catch our overseas flight. On the road to Chicago, we passed a field with several cows grazing. The Japanese guy said, "Doesn't that make you hungry?" I paused and said, "What makes me hungry?" He said, "Seeing those cows." Holy cow! I never ever had thoughts like that. That was crazy, but I didn't say anything. We got on the plane to Tokyo, and that was the longest flight I had ever been on. I think it was 14 hours or something like that. I think it went over Alaska or maybe the North Pole. Whatever route it was made a very long time in that plane. The Japanese guys all smoked, and there was a lounge in the back of the plane where they could smoke. The smokers spent a lot of those 14 hours back there, not me. Those 3 weeks in Japan were long. I did get to see quite a bit of how the Japanese lived. It was interesting from that standpoint. I didn't have a car and depended on someone to drive me around. I did stay in a nice hotel about 5 or 6 miles from the plant. The traffic and congestion made every trip seem like 20 or 30 miles. I remember the first day I arrived at the plant. All the employees were outside of the building and doing their stretching and warm-ups. Then they lead me up on the podium where the exercise leader was and asked me to address the workers. Talk about a big surprise. I had no idea what to say to them. They probably didn't speak English anyway. So I managed to say good morning and how excited I was to learn about making the products. Then I thought, they probably don't want to hear about moving the production to the US. Oh well. During the 3 weeks I moved around from department to department watching the workers doing their jobs. Most of the time I was on my own with no interpreter, so I didn't talk to anyone. Sometimes my boss would come around and take me from one place to another. Then I would get to ask questions. There were a couple of things that were pretty strange. I would eat in the plant cafeteria, along with the workers. I would walk through the line and get things on my plate, and I never knew what it was. But I sat and ate my lunch along with the others and lived through it. The oddest thing was the bathrooms in the plant. It was just a big room with a trench down the middle with water flowing through it. You did what you had to do in the trench. You just straddled the trench and either stood to relieve yourself or squatted. Oh, what a sight, especially with several all in a line. The exception to this was the president's office. He had a normal bathroom and stool. I did spend 2 weekends there, and most of the time I would go out of the hotel and walk a few blocks. There were several American chain restaurants close by. There was a McDonald's, a KFC, and a Pizza Hut. The trouble was that they had menus in Japanese and not English. One Saturday, a nice fellow that worked in the office at the plant picked me up and drove me around sightseeing. We went to a park with a lake and to a religious site where we could walk around and see very old buildings of worship. Later that day, the gentleman took me to his home to meet his family and have dinner with them. That was very kind of him, and I got to see how they really lived. It was a nice apartment building. When we went in the door to his home, there were all their shoes. I took my shoes off too. The rooms were small, but very nice and clean. For dinner, we all sat on the floor in a circle around a small short table with the food on it. I don't remember what we had, but it was all very good. My boss would come by the hotel and take me to dinner each evening. Those dinners were always at very nice restaurant, and I very much enjoyed the introduction to Japanese cuisine. As my trip was coming to an end, I was really ready to come back home to Joni. It was also very close to Christmas, and I would only have a couple of days to get all my shopping done. As I look back, I can say that I'm glad I had the opportunity to go to Japan, but there's no place like home. I am very proud of the fact that I was the first American hired by VRT, and I was able to get the factory up and running and successfully transfer the production of the rubber automotive parts from Japan for our American customers. The plant went from 1 employee to 200 in 2 years. That was not easy, but well worth it. It's sad, but 2 years after I left VRT, they moved to North Carolina. I joined my wife Joni in her home construction business called Village Builders.